We're going to take a look at one of my favorites this morning, a favorite for a variety of reasons, Long Black Train by Josh Turner. Written and performed by Josh. Now, I said it's one of my favorites for a variety of reasons. First, Josh is a solid believer, very outspoken about his faith. You might not realize that he actually grew up singing in gospel quartets. He was the bass singer, as you might suspect. And it was always a big and fun part of his life. But second, Josh is a Belmont guy. So I got a little bias in that regard as well. But this song it's a great song with an interesting twist, I think. And I don't know if Josh intended it this way, but for me, it's an interesting twist even from a theological perspective, if a country song can be a theological statement. I think this one is. There are many songs about trains in country music and in Christian music that imply a train that is bound for heaven. I think about that old song, "People get ready, there's a train a-coming." Who wrote that song? Was that Arlo Guthrie that wrote that song? One of those old-time folk singers wrote that song. "Life's Railway to Heaven." Life is like mighty railway and engineers very brave or something. "This train is bound for glory. This train is bound for glory. This train." Lots of train songs, the implication of which is the train is bound for heaven. But listen to these lyrics from Josh Turner's Long Black Train. "Well, I can hear the whistle from a mile away. It sounds so good, but I must stay away. That train is a beauty, making everybody stare. But its only destination is the middle of nowhere. 'Cause there's victory in the Lord, I say, victory in the Lord. Cling to the Father and His holy name, and don't go riding on that long black train." And then the tagline of the song, "That devil's a-driving that long black train." We hear train, we think heaven. This is a song about a train that's really a song about temptation. And I find it interesting. That's kind of the interesting twist that I find in this song, that at first glance we think about long black train. Well, that train's bound for glory. Let's hop on that train. And yet Josh's lyrics are, no, this is a song about temptation. It sounds good, it looks good, but you don't want to go riding that long black train. And so, just like temptation, this song is talking about a train that's got that deception in it. Well, when he writes the line, "I can hear the whistle, sounds so good, but I must stay away," that sounds to me like a good approach for us to take to temptation. And I want to read what is probably the most eloquent and complete treatise in the Scriptures about facing and dealing with temptation. We find in the first chapter of James, James 1. And I want to read verses 12 through 16. "Blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am tempted by God.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. So I begin this morning with that lyric about the appeal of the train. I can hear the whistle from a mile away. It sounds so good, but I must stay away. That train is a beauty, making everybody stare. But its only destination is the middle of nowhere. Let me tell you, Josh Turner nailed the theology in that verse, the theology of how temptation works. I love always pointing back to, some of you will remember this old cultural reference. Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it. And we all laughed. Flip Wilson had the theology right too. It wasn't the Lord. The Lord doesn't tempt us. The Lord doesn't lead us to temptation. It is the enemy that leads us to temptation. And in James' warning here to the first century church in verse 14, he spoke of the believer being drawn away. In verse 14, each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. That word enticed, I think, is the key word in that verse. It's the appeal of the long black train. It sounds great. It looks great. It's not usually, it's like temptation is not usually unpleasant in and of itself. Did that make sense? I want to make sure, I want to pause there because I don't want somebody to think I just misstated what I was trying to say. Temptation doesn't look unappealing. Temptation doesn't look unattractive. Temptation doesn't look unpleasant. Quite the contrary. Temptation looks like, that's the real thing. That's what I'm after. That's what's going to bring me happiness. That's what's going to fulfill all the empty spaces in my life. It looks good, sounds good, feels good. But it is an enticement. And I think I've mentioned it to you before that word enticement there, it's an old fishing term. It relates to the bait that you put on a fish hook. It's similar to that idea that you put bait on a hook and that's what the fish go for. The fish don't go for the hook. I've never known a fish that went for the hook. They go for the bait, and the hook gets them. We don't go for the consequences of sin. That's not what appeals to us. That long road that, as James continues, that the end of that road, or if I can borrow the analogy, the end of that railroad track that long black train is on, it leads us to sin and ultimately to death and separation from God if we allow it to. But that's not what's appealing to us. I have long believed that there's not a single heroin addict in the world that became a heroin addict because they wanted to become a heroin addict. Oh, that sounds great. I don't think there's a single alcoholic in the world that said, I think I want to become an alcoholic. That sounds like a nice life ambition. That's not the appeal of temptation. The appeal of the train is that first step that leads us off into that. The pleasure or the joy or the beauty of that particular temptation. But we see the appeal of the train is that temptation is attractive. But certainly the consequence is without question the danger of the train. getting on that train, James' warning continues. He says, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. So the temptation is here, looks appealing, looks attractive, and desire has conceived, I think I'm going to go there. It gives birth to sin. That's where the sin happens. When sin, when it is full grown, James writes, brings forth death. Danger! Exclamation point, exclamation point. That's where the danger comes. Now, here's an important distinction. And again, this is one of those things that when I say, you're going to think, I'm not sure you're saying the right thing there, Rich, but stick with me here for a second. Temptation is not sin. Being tempted to sin is not sin. Yielding to the temptation is when it becomes sin. When we yield to the temptation and actually go and cross that line, go and do that thing, that's when the sin occurs. That's when we've hopped up on that long black train. When you see the train coming, it's coming around. No, it's a different song. When you see that train and it looks attractive, that's not where the sin is. The sin is hopping on the train. Temptation, however, again, this is the important distinction. Temptation itself is not sin. Temptation, however, is danger. And so we don't want to play games with temptation. We don't want to play the game that says, I got this. I can handle this. This little thing, I'm not going to go far down this path. I can go this far and I'm in control. That's the danger sign. When we start bringing ourselves toward what is attractive to us and appealing to us, it doesn't get less appealing the closer we get. It gets more appealing. And so the temptation is stronger the closer we get to it. And so we don't want to flirt with temptation. We don't want to play with, really, fire. We want to run like the wind away from temptation before it conceives and gives birth to sin. Josh Turner got that right in the lyric. He got that so right. That train's a beauty, making everybody stare. There's the temptation. But its only destination is the middle of nowhere. And he's saying, don't go riding that long black train. I got to stay away from that long black train. And that leads me to the notion of what is the escape from the train. Forgive me if I carry the analogy a step further. Sometimes we go a step too far, maybe, trying to make everything analogous, but I think this one might still work. It's hard to jump off a fast-moving train. It's hard to jump off a slow-moving train.